Imagine the worst horror movie you have ever seen. Now, imagine that this is not fiction. It is a summer morning. The sun is shining. Birds should be singing. But instead, the air has a smell that is sweet, metallic, and deadly. The date is August 6, 1915, on the Eastern Front of World War I. On one side of the field, 7,000 soldiers of the German Imperial Army are marching, the elite of the era. They walk with the posture of winners, rifles lowered, expecting to find a trench full of silent corpses. Suddenly, the silence is torn apart, not by a war cry, but by a sound that froze the blood of every German soldier. A sound of coughing, a sound of lungs being spat out. From the trenches covered in a toxic green mist, dozens of figures stand up. They do not look human. Their faces are wrapped in rags soaked in dark blood. Their exposed skin is green and covered in blisters. Their eyes are bleeding. They stumble, almost falling, but they keep moving forward. The Germans, paralyzed by primal terror, screamed a phrase that would echo through history. The dead are attacking! What happened at the Osowiec fortress defies biology and military logic. How did 60 men, technically dead, defeat an army of 7,000? Today, on OnlyWar, we are going to dissect the most macabre event of the Great War. To understand why this attack was necessary, we need to understand the scenario. World War I was not just mud and trenches in France. In the East, the war was massive, covering enormous distances. Germany had a simple plan: crush France quickly in the West, and then throw all its weight against Russia in the East. But there was a thorn in the German side: the Osowiec fortress. Located in the northeast of modern-day Poland, Osowiec was not just an old castle. It was a strategic defensive complex built on the banks of the Bibra River. What made Osowiec special were not just its concrete walls, but the geography. It was surrounded by impassable swamps. Imagine a giant bog of mud and water. You could not pass tanks, horses, or heavy artillery through the swamps. There was only one railway and one highway crossing the region. And guess who was sitting right in the middle of that passage? The Osowiec fortress. If the Germans wanted to take Russia, they had to go through there. There was no alternative route. The Russian command knew this. General Nikolai Brozovsky, commander of the fortress, fortified the area with 4 interconnected forts, reinforced concrete bunkers, and hidden artillery positions. In September 1914, the Germans tried the first assault. They launched their infantry with numerical superiority. They were repelled. The Russians, using Maxim machine guns and Mosin-Nagant rifles, turned the swamp into a German graveyard. The Germans retreated, licked their wounds, and realized, we are not going to take this with brute force. They needed firepower, a lot of firepower. February 1915. The Russian winter is brutal, but the Germans returned with blood in their eyes. This time, they brought the gods of war. The German army positioned 68 artillery batteries pointed at the fortress. Among them were the technological monsters of the time, the Skoda 305mm mortars, and the most terrifying of all, the Big Bertha howitzer of 420mm. For those who like technical details, pay attention to this. A single shell of Big Bertha weighed over 1,700 pounds. When it hit the ground, it opened a crater 5 meters deep and killed anything within a radius of 200 meters just from the shock wave. The bombardment began, and it did not stop for a week. Historical records say that in the first days alone, more than 250,000 heavy artillery shells fell on the fortress. From above, German planes looked down and said the fortress looked like an erupting volcano, smoke, fire, and earth flying non-stop. The Russian Supreme Command, seeing that destruction, sent a telegram to General Brozovsky. "We do not expect you to survive. Hold the position for 48 hours just so we can evacuate the civilians. After that, you are free to die or surrender." 48 hours. But the Russian garrison did not surrender. They hid in the depths of the concrete bunkers. They covered their ears against the deafening noise that drove men insane, and they waited. When the German artillery finally stopped, thinking everything had turned to dust, the German infantry advanced, and to their surprise, the Russian machine guns started singing again. The Russians emerged from the rubble, covered in dust, and defended the position. The Germans were furious. The Osowiec fortress had become a personal obsession for Field Marshal von Hindenburg. They spent millions on ammunition and did not advance a single meter. It was in this moment of frustration that the ethics of war were thrown in the trash. If concrete could withstand the bombs, Russian lungs would not withstand the chemistry. We arrive in July 1915. The Germans change tactics. They decide to use a weapon of mass destruction. The plan was meticulous. They brought 30 gas batteries camouflaged in the forest. There were thousands of cylinders containing an experimental mixture, liquefied chlorine gas mixed with bromine. Why chlorine? Chlorine is a cruel weapon by nature. First, it is a choking agent. Second, and most importantly, it is denser than air. This means that unlike normal smoke that rises, chlorine sinks. It creeps along the ground like a snake, filling the trenches, artillery holes, and underground bunkers, exactly where the Russians were hiding. The Germans waited patiently. They needed the perfect wind. If the wind changed, the gas would blow back on them. For days they watched the weather vanes, and at dawn on August 6th at 4 in the morning, the breeze blew toward the Russians. The valves were opened. A wall of dark green gas, about 12 meters high and kilometers wide, began to roll across the battlefield. Now, a tragic detail. Russian defense technology was outdated. The famous gas masks with activated carbon filters were still being developed and had not reached the front. The soldiers at Osowiec had no protection. Nothing. Some officers had simple gauze masks, which were useless against that concentration of chlorine. When the lookouts saw the green cloud approaching, the alarm sounded, but there was nowhere to run. The desperate order was given: use urine. It may seem disgusting today, but it was their only chance. The ammonia present in urine reacts with chlorine and neutralizes part of it. The soldiers took off their undershirts, urinated on them, and tied them around their faces. But the cloud that hit Osowiec was too dense. The chemistry began to act. When you inhale chlorine gas, it reacts with the water in the mucous membranes of your lungs and throat. The chemical reaction creates hydrochloric acid. Basically, the soldiers began to be burned from the inside out. Their lungs began to melt and fill with fluids. They were drowning on dry land. The effect of the gas was apocalyptic. Not only humans suffered. Vegetation in a radius of kilometers turned black and died instantly. Leaves fell from the trees. The grass turned gray. Birds fell dead from the sky mid-flight.
Even the weapons suffered. The metal parts of rifles and cannons oxidized immediately, covered by a green layer of copper chloride. Food spoiled. Well water became poisoned. In the Russian lines, silence reigned. The 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th militia companies were annihilated. We are talking about entire companies where everyone died in agony in a matter of minutes. In the trenches, bodies were piled, faces purple and twisted. On the German side, officers watched with binoculars. No movement, no shots. The mission seemed accomplished. The path to Russia was finally open. Field Marshal Hindenburg gave the order. 14 battalions, about 7,000 soldiers began to advance. They did not run, they marched. For them, this was no longer a battle. It was a corpse cleanup operation. They expected to enter the fortress, kick some bodies, and raise the flag of the German Empire. The Russian resistance was mathematically dead. But mathematics does not account for human fury. The Germans crossed the first line of defense without firing a shot. Everything dead. They approached the ruins of the second line. They were relaxed. But then, from the shadows of the toxic fog, a man stood up. Second Lieutenant Vladimir Kutlinsky. He could barely stand. He was severely poisoned, but he held his pistol with the strength he had left. Beside him, others began to stand up. What remained of the 13th Company, about 60 men, maybe a few more, but not even 100. Their appearance was a nightmare incarnate. They no longer had clean uniforms. They were covered in vomit, blood, and chemical earth. Their skin had a horrific greenish tint due to intoxication. They could not shout hurrah like in a normal attack. Their throats were destroyed. The sound that came out of them was a raspy roar, mixed with violent coughing, spitting out pieces of lung tissue with every step. Kutlinsky ordered a bayonet charge. Think about that. They were in no condition to aim and shoot. They ran for hand-to-hand combat. 60 dying men against 7,000 healthy soldiers. When the German vanguard saw that, something broke in their minds. The average German soldier was superstitious, exhausted, and in a strange land. Seeing those dead figures standing up and running towards them, military logic vanished. "The dead do not die," someone screamed. Panic spread like a virus. The soldiers in the front retreated, pushing those in the back. The German formation collapsed in seconds. Nobody shot, they just ran. The terror was so absolute that the Germans dropped machine guns, dropped supplies. They ran back into their own barbed wire traps. In that chaos, the Russian artillery, operated by the few gunners who could still see, opened fire on the compact mass of fleeing Germans. It was a massacre. The 7,000 men of the German elite were defeated by the fear of 60 ghosts. The Germans did not take the fortress that day. They fled back to their lines, traumatized. But there was no celebration in the Russian trench. The cost was total. Second Lieutenant Kutlinsky, the man who led the impossible attack, died that night, suffocated by the gas damage. The vast majority of the dead men who participated in the charge succumbed in the following days in field hospitals. They knew they would not survive. The gas had already done the work. But they chose to use their last minutes of life not to cry, but to fight. This sacrifice bought time. Weeks later, the Russian command realized the fortress would not withstand another chemical attack. They evacuated everything they could, and on August 18th, Russian engineers blew up what remained of Osowiec. When the Germans finally entered, they found nothing but ruins and graves. This story was forgotten for a long time, overshadowed by the battles of the Western Front. But the attack of the dead men teaches us a valuable lesson about war. You can have the greatest technology. You can have the biggest cannon, like Big Bertha. You can have the deadliest chemistry. But the human factor, the sheer willpower to protect your land and your brothers, that is something no weapon can calculate. The 60 of Osowiec proved that sometimes the human spirit is stronger than death itself. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, subscribe to OnlyWar. We bring the raw truth of the conflicts that shaped the world. Leave a like and comment below. What other impossible battle do you want to see here? I am your narrator, and I will see you on the next front. Over and out.